Hello and welcome to today's episode of Inside Workplace Wellbeing. I'm Nicole Dinan, Australia's leading corporate nutrition expert and gut health dietitian. If you've been following our social media content across Instagram and LinkedIn, you know that this month is Gut Health Month, where we're focusing on the link between what you eat and how you feel. So this has led us to a fantastic deep dive into the role coffee plays in our everyday life and how everyone's favourite workplace beverage can impact our mood. It's a hot topic, and it's the one thing I'm constantly asked about in my role as a nutrition expert. So earlier this month, I was lucky enough to sit down with coffee industry expert Lee Safar at the Daily Coffee Pro podcast to talk about how much coffee you should be drinking and the interesting health benefits coffee can play in our everyday life. Check out the show notes for the links to our chat. One thing we also explored was the World Wellbeing movement out of the Wellbeing Centre at Oxford University and the 4 pillars they have identified to capture a sense of workplace wellbeing. Those being a sense of purpose, job satisfaction, manageable stress, and our level of happiness. In today's episode, we're speaking to Lee about her own workplace wellbeing journey, which took her from a life as a genetic scientist to a life as a barista to now being one of the most trusted voices in the complex supply chain that is the coffee industry. I really hope today's episode helps you reflect on how your workplace is contributing to your own well-being and, of course, help you look at the things you could be tweaking to eat and feel better this Gut Health Month. Let's get started on today's episode. Welcome to the Inside Workplace Wellbeing podcast, Lee. We're very excited to have you here today. We'd love to get to know you a little bit more and learn about how you became one of the leading voices in the coffee industry globally. So can you start by telling us a bit about yourself and how you got into coffee in the first place?
Thanks for having me, Nicole. It's a real privilege to be here. I used to be in the scientific world, actually. I am a trained genetic scientist. I didn't like working in a lab, so I tried the corporate world. And after being in the corporate world for about a decade, I realized that wasn't for me either. And so I decided that I wanted to go and find what I was passionate about, and coffee and music were the 2 things that I was passionate about. So I decided, screw this, I'm going to go and see what it's like to be a barista. And in
Amazing.
Sydney at the time, it was kind of the beginning of what we now call specialty coffee. And I had no idea what it would be like to go from being a project manager and senior business analyst at IBM to being a barista in with a mortgage. I had a mortgage at the time and a husband and responsibilities. And I'm like, I don't even know how much they pay baristas. So I don't know if this is going to work. But so I got into that and I thought, I'm going to try and find a way to navigate that and see if I can build a career as a recording artist and release music. So the focus of my life really shifted from being somebody who was led by making money and building a life and ticking boxes to how do I become someone who can be intentional and live a passion-filled life without being like some hippy-dippy person who didn't have any focus or purpose. And so it became a really steep learning curve for me in living the kind of life that nobody around me had set an example for. And I didn't want to be somebody who wafted aimlessly through the world. I was somebody who focused on being a high achiever. I didn't know what that looked like outside of like a corporate world. So I started building businesses and I started experiencing different cultures. So I moved to America and was building businesses in coffee in America after having been a barista in Australia for 15 years. So as I built that, a lot of the time I was like, am I doing this right? As you go through these things, and I have this philosophy, and I tell my consulting clients this a lot, being in business is going to teach you everything you never wanted to know about yourself. And I have used that as a guiding force to keep the right kind of discomfort in my life and be comfortable with that discomfort so that I could traverse new frontiers in coffee and new frontiers in business ownership and help my clients find a way to find their voice through business. And over that time, I found that there was a gap. And the gap was that the voices that were representing our industry were focused on things like coffee competitions and latte art competitions, but there wasn't any kind of voice that was talking about the challenges in industry, the challenges in business, the challenges in the economics of coffee, business management and that kind of stuff. And people were telling me at the time, your podcast is a little bit too intelligent, like it's a bit too serious. And I knew that at some point, about 10 years ago, we started the podcast 7 years ago. And I knew at that time, I didn't know what it was going to be, but something was going to happen that stopped people being addicted to the easy to digest information and made them want to pay attention. And so I started releasing an episode every day of the podcast, and it was a slow build, and I knew I was playing the long game. But then the pandemic happened. And when the pandemic happened, people were looking for a voice that they could count on that wasn't dessert for dinner. And it was real substance. Sorry to use a nutritional analogy.
It's perfect.
But it was all focused on substance and nutrition and for the mind and for the soul. And people started to see a sense of safety in it. So now the podcast is the kind of most reliable source of information in the industry. It is the most respected podcast in the world, and the business has become a thriving business globally.
Oh, amazing. Like there is so much I'd like to unpack there. Like just from a well-being perspective, I think you just personify well-being in so many ways. From your own personal journey, just even to being able to really cut through the noise in the coffee industry and really focus on what matters. So on that, what can you tell us what you've observed sort of in terms of growth and change in the industry over that last 20 years or so, as long as you've been, directing your career in this way?
Yeah.
And do you think small business owners are faring, reasonably well in the post-COVID world?
It's fascinating to look at something over 20 years and to see what has changed and what hasn't changed. The thing that you see in the coffee industry, because there's such a low barrier to entry, people seem to think that this is going to be their gateway to freedom from the corporate world or freedom from something else that's trapping them. And because there's so many cafes in a lot of societies these days, people tend to think that these businesses are going to be successful, wildly successful. But we have what I call the success fallacy in our industry, where people come into it thinking, well, a cup of coffee costs this much in coffee and this much in milk, and the cup can only be this much. So if it only costs 50 cents to make a cup of coffee and I'm selling it for $5, there's so much money in coffee. Actually, the reality of it is when you take into account how much it costs to run a business, a well-run cafe operates at about 3% net profit. And that includes us not paying the coffee producer very well. That's a whole part of the coffee story that the general public doesn't have insight into. And so with so much of this dysfunction being historic from a small business owner at the consuming end of the market, as well as historically for coffee producers, people might be shocked to know that the price of coffee hasn't shifted in 30 years. As a commodity, we still pay the same price that we do today that we did 30 years ago. When things like the war in Russia and Ukraine has increased the cost of inputs for coffee producers anywhere between 300 and 600%. 300% to 600% has been the increase in inputs.
Mm.
So the fertilizers to produce these crops has gone up
Mm.
just by that much. And that's just one side of things.
Mm.
So coffee will go away. Coffee is a commodity that will become a luxury product. There's no two ways about it. It's already happening. It is such a complex agricultural product that it's easier to grow avocados and mangoes and macadamia trees in a lot of the coffee growing regions than it is to grow coffee. And the politics around coffee is so stigmatized and it is so intense that governments around the world are deciding that we end up reducing a lot of our issues geopolitically as well as internally in different economies by not growing coffee anymore. It's easier to grow coca. It's easier to grow opium. It's easier to grow cot. It's easier to grow all of these other commodities than it is to grow coffee. So over 20 years, while I have seen, excuse me, I have seen technology evolve. I have seen the increase in the uptake of consumption of coffee. The historical issues in our industry have gone unchanged. And we kick the can down the road a lot with a lot of these issues. And what I'm finding is post-COVID, COVID really held our industry on the back end. It really held our industry accountable because Gen Z were aging into our industry at the time and they started participating during COVID and they said, yeah, nah, this is not how we want to live our lives. And so because of that, we have across the entire supply chain, we have less people working in the industry, a heavier dependency on technology and AI and automation. And this is going to transform the industry as we move forward, as well as small business owners having to adapt to that need on razor thin margins and less availability of coffee. There's so much going on there.
There is so much going on there, and the availability of coffee's got me sweating a little bit.
You've got to hook up. I'll always take care of you. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, so it is interesting what you were saying about the impact of COVID on the businesses as well, because certainly, what we see here in Sydney, a lot of us used to work in the city area, in downtown, the CBD, but now, we don't go in, or we go in just a couple of days a week. And so a lot of these small businesses are really struggling to keep afloat, and some of the businesses that were there pre-COVID are no longer there. So do you see an impact on your clients as well as a result of that whole broader workplace ecosystem changing?
Yeah, what we saw during COVID was really fascinating. So the cafes that were really making a lot of money during business as usual pre-COVID were focused in the central business districts, the downtown areas, because that's where all the workforce was. What happened during COVID was that the neighborhood cafes that were barely surviving started thriving. And the cafes that had exorbitantly high rents in the CBD districts, they had no choice but to close permanently. And the return to work for them has been a slow drip. And it meant that the people who were making most of the money in our supply chain, which are the banks, the landlords, and the equipment manufacturers, they really had to show up and try and entice businesses back to work in the CBD. And a lot of business owners just decided that it wasn't worth it. So there was a shift in consumer behavior to neighborhood cafes. And now, as the cost of living crisis has entered the piece, people took their COVID habits in the way that they consumed coffee during COVID, which was that they purchased a lot of home brewing equipment. They've taken that during the cost of living crisis and they've decided, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to consume my coffee at home and I'm going to learn how to brew at home. What that has done is I teach people how to become coffee consultants as a part of what we do at Map It Forward. That has meant that our client base has shifted. So now we teach a lot more people how to be consultants to home brewers.
Right.
So you can see that there is, as a lot of the forces at play economically um, become more present in the industry, that's causing us to shift and adapt and to be quite malleable in the way that we express ourselves as professionals.
Yeah. So it's really just changed the landscape entirely.
And
Yeah.
and and
It's
it was
opened a
almost
new customer base.
totally, and it was like there was no change for 15 years. And then, like with a lot of industries, COVID happened and then it was at rapid rate. So the rate of change in the past 4 years in our industry has been very unsettling, but very exciting at the same time, because all of those cans that we kicked down the road, as I mentioned, now we're being held accountable for it and we have to deal with them.
So in terms of, like, obviously there's still some of those cafes in the neighborhood cafes, there's still probably some supporting businesses within central business districts and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still supporting those as a business as well?
Yeah, I'm supporting those, but even they have to adapt. So a lot of them are bringing on board e-commerce businesses in order to adapt. Their customer acquisition planning has changed significantly. The way that they entice customers to come in, because what we're starting to see is a lot of people are taking their home brewing habits into the office. And so
Right.
an example of that is a business in Sydney called Stitch Coffee. Everyone go there. I think it's the best coffee roasting company in the world and the best cafe in the world. But the reason I say that is because they are an example of how this manifests. They have a cafe in Broadway and they have a cafe in the QVB. And they were significantly impacted during COVID. So what the owner, Noah, did was he adapted by bringing steeped bags and drip bags into his product lines. And they're his fastest selling retail product now, because people then take them into the workplace and they brew their coffee, same kind of coffee that you would get in the cafe, but they brew it in the workplace. And so there's now new layers to doing business in coffee. You can't just have a traditional cafe kind of experience. You've got to come up with product lines that help your customers take their coffee experience into the home and into the workplace. Otherwise, you're not going to survive. And a lot of
Oh,
that
I
is
love that.
e-commerce or not.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's adaptation at its best, isn't it? Adaptation for survival of a
Uh-huh.
business, as we've all had to sort of manage over COVID.
Mm.
And what about well-being within, like, some of those industries, like that cafe you're talking about in Sydney? Um, Obviously, like, they would have staff. Do you know much about the well-being focus that those remaining cafes have in terms of employee well-being within their organisations? Is it something they're able to manage?
Historically, we don't have a great track record in our industry of the way that we manage well-being in the workplace.
Mhm.
Typically because not only is the barrier to entry very low for business owners, but it's also very low for our workforce.
Mhm.
And because of that, we don't have a standard of professionalism that's expected in the workplace. So there's this real disconnect in the way that the workforce and the employers within the workforce learn how to communicate with each other, learn how to be professional with each other. And this is, I see it again and again and again. It just leads
Mhm.
to constant dysfunction in the
Mhm.
workplace. When you've got an accepted, I mean, everyone's seen, shows like what Gordon Ramsay is on, where in kitchens you've got chefs throwing hot pans
Mhm.
across the kitchen. None of that
Mhm.
is hyperbolic. Like, that
Mhm.
is the way that our industry
Mhm.
works.
Mhm.
And because of that, you've got people, we attract a certain kind of insecure um, person to our industry. It's a person who wants to belong. And it's very easy to belong
Mhm.
because of the low barrier to entry. But the moment that you feel psychologically unsafe, that triggers
Mhm.
a whole cascade of reactions in a workplace, none of which are regulated.
Mhm.
And that creates it's amazing when it's all working well, and then it turns on a dime. And a
How
lot of
much?
people,
Oh,
go
sorry,
tell me.
go on. I was just going to say, how much do you think, the shift work component of cafes plays into that? The lack of sleep, possibly the poor nutrition. Do you think that has any bearing on the behaviour that you see in
Major,
those workplaces? Yeah.
major. I think that the challenge there is that we are not prioritizing helping people who come into our industry look after themselves.
Mm,
And I don't think that that's an intentional thing. I think that people get into our industry thinking, I'm going to take care of my staff. I'm going to take care of my suppliers. This is going to
mm,
be amazing. I'm a professional. I'm really good at this stuff. I have the best intentions. And then they get into it. And 100% of the time, I speak to business owners after they've done it. And they all say, if I had have known that it was going to be this hard, I would never have done it. And they're just in
amazing.
constant
Mm,
reaction mode.
yeah. Yeah.
And what comes from that is you want to look after people, but you no longer have the bandwidth to take care of them. So you as a business owner, you're not sleeping, you have terrible nutrition. Your family may be hounding you because, you did this so that you'd stop working really long hours at work.
Mhm.
And now you're working 7 days a week, 16 to 18 hours a day. It wasn't supposed to
Mm,
be this hard.
no.
And then your
Yeah.
employees are looking to you as a leader and you don't have the bandwidth to be a leader.
No. Yeah. Yeah. You're almost a victim of your own circumstance, and you're burnt out from your own setup.
Yep.
Is there anyone that you've seen that's managed to do it well?
Um, the best way to answer that is that there's nobody that I've seen, excuse me, there's nobody that I've seen that's done it well initially.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people that I have seen do it well after 10 years.
Right.
So if you can, usually the way that it works is that 50% of small businesses across the board close within the first 3 years,
Wow.
80% close within the first 5 years. I didn't believe that data initially. So then I took the data and analyzed it myself, and it's right.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
so what happens is if you can survive after 5 years, you start to get into a rhythm where now you've started to break even and you've started to get some comfort, and then you've created some space for you to start taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
Once you've taken care of yourself, then you can start to take care of your employees. There is a
Mm.
direct correlation that I have seen with business owners, excuse me, business owners who are able to manage the growth rate of their business and their mental health. So, what you see is that people get into too much debt as a business. They think that they can fix that by opening a second business. We all know that people who get married, have a terrible marriage, think that having a baby is going to fix that. That doesn't fix it. So, they have another baby. It's the
Mhm.
exact same thing.
Mm-mm. Yeah. Good
So,
analogy. Mm.
it's one of these things where when I see that business owners have been able to regulate the growth rate of their business and slow that down so that it's at a pace where they can manage, what they're almost doing there is, well, what they are doing there is they're reducing the friction in their life so that they have space to focus on their own well-being.
Yeah.
When they do that, and it takes a long time for people to figure out that journey. And that's
Yeah.
why I say being in business is going to teach you everything you never wanted to know about yourself. That's
Yeah.
that's that friction point, right? That's that journey
Yeah.
of what's my relationship to success? What's my relationship to myself? What's my relationship to my own well-being? Why am I prioritizing everything over my own well-being? And everybody arrives back at the same place. When I prioritize my own well-being, I end up being able to prioritize other people's well-being as well.
Well, that's a great message. I think that's a fantastic way to sort of round out that discussion. And it sounds like that's something that your business supports
Big
your
time.
clients with as well, in terms of trying to just to actually manage that growth and their own well-being as part
Yeah.
of it. Um, So just in the essence of time, because I could talk to you forever on that, there's just obviously so much to unpack and so much great work that you're doing out there in that small business coffee area. Is there anything you do personally, Lee, that helps you look after your own health and well-being?
I very much appreciate this question because it's kind of the center of everything. I'm one of those business owners who realize if I prioritize my own well-being, I can better prioritize everybody else's. So I focus very intentionally on a consciousness practice.
Mm-hmm.
I prioritize sleep. I prioritize good nutrition
Mm-hmm.
more than anything. And I think that the one thing that has been the most important part of my own well-being is managing the relationships in my life so that I hold myself accountable to the kind of people that I allow into the sphere of what I do, whether that's on a personal level or a professional level. So I am responsible for the people that I bring into my life and the people who I no longer allow to have access to my life. And all of that gets destroyed when I have terrible sleep and I eat sugar, basically. I've noticed a direct correlation with my mood and sugar. So I cut out refined sugars very staunchly about 15 years ago. And I noticed that if I have like a Coke Zero or I have a small piece of candy, I could be wrecked for 2 days.
Right. The spike in the blood sugar levels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all of that for me has become a very intentional practice. And I realized that if I want to be the best performing coach that I can be for other people, I have to maintain a really high frequency for myself. If I want to show up for the people that I love, then I have to take responsibility for showing up for myself first.
Amazing. Look, I think we can all take some of that advice on ourselves, and obviously it's paying dividends for you because you are like helping a lot of people in that industry and you're doing a lot of great work. And so to wrap up our podcast today, where can our listeners find you if they want to learn more about coffee and your business, Map It Forward?
I appreciate the question. We have a podcast called The Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward. It's everywhere, also on YouTube. And you can find us on social media at mapitforward.coffee. And we're on Instagram. We haven't done the TikToks yet. We're trying to limit our exposure to social media, which sounds kind of counterintuitive, but well-being and all that. So that's kind of where, and also our website, mapitforward.coffee.
Mapitforward.coffee. I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are, the high achiever, but you're doing lots of great work out there, and I really appreciate you coming on the Inside Workplace Wellbeing Show. Hope to see you again. It's been a
privilege. It's been an absolute privilege. Thank you for everything that you're doing and the information that you're putting out there into the world. It really does go a long way to helping people figure out how to navigate this space. So thank you for what you're doing, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lee. Same. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. We'll
Take care.
Wrap it up there.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. So that's it for today's episode. My biggest takeaway from the conversation with Lee was prioritizing your own well-being allows you to show up better, perform better, and prioritize others better. Her courageous decision to leave a high-flying job to follow her passions of coffee and music and support a true sense of personal happiness is testament to that, and one that has led to immense job satisfaction and a life of freedom and purpose. We'd love to know what resonated with you too. So go on Instagram and DM us at The Good Nutrition Co. or connect with us via LinkedIn. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you liked today's episode, make sure you leave us a review and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on future episodes. Thanks for joining me today. Stay well. Bye for now. Today's episode is brought to you by The Good Nutrition Co., Australia's leading corporate nutrition partner. The Good Nutrition Co. has helped support the health and wellbeing of over 35,000 employees around Australia with exclusive masterclasses and on-demand learning, on-site workshops and one-on-one dietitian support. Head to goodnutritionco.com to find out how we can help you build a culture of health, wellness and productivity in the workplace today.